Greetings, fellow Doctor Who fans, and welcome to a Who Was That Masked Man edition of Who on Who, the podcast devoted to the review of classic series Doctor Who DVDs, as always, in no particular order. I'm your host, also as always, David Huey, and I'm very happy to have you with me as we discuss a wonderful classic series episode that is always constantly ranked high among Doctor Who fans as one of the best, and that is Peter Davison's swan song, Caves of Androzani. So I'm very excited about getting into that, but before we do, as always, have some email in the letter bag to get to.
Here's the mail, it never fails. It makes me want to wag my tail. When it comes, I want to wail.
All right, this first email comes from Dave Keep, a friend of mine who has written to me a few times. We've sort of shared emails back and forth, and I believe I have read one of his previous emails on another podcast. He writes back and says, if it's not too cheeky, I have a suggestion. You've mentioned reviewing Trial of a Time Lord, and while it is far from being the best of the Doctor Who stories, the DVD does have some of the best features. These do bring back painful memories of the amount of ridicule the show suffered in the mid-'80s, not all of which were unjustified. Watch the Doctor in Distress video, but have a stiff drink in hand. It might be of interest to American listeners if you get the Tin Dog or another British podcaster on board to discuss this. I hope you don't mind the suggestion. I know that I will enjoy the episode, whatever you decide and however you decide to proceed, Dave. Well, thank you, Dave, and that's a great suggestion. I have talked about doing Trial of a Time Lord. I have the box set sitting here, and now it's got a nice thin layer of dust collecting on it because I have yet to pop one of them out and actually start watching and reviewing. But that is coming down the pike. I love Dave's idea of getting a fellow podcaster on. I think I want to take it a half a step further. So for any of you out there, listeners who are British, and that could be British or Australian or anybody who's non-American, and I'm not trying to be too nitpicky here. I just want to get a different sort of mindset because I already am an American. But any non-American listeners out there who might like to try your hand at coming on the show with me and reviewing a DVD, if you have the Trial of the Time Lord set, because I certainly don't want to ask you to go out and spend a lot of money to buy it, or if you have access, what I would like to do is get a different co-host for each DVD in that set, and what we will do is sort of do like an amateur hour kind of thing. So I don't want you to be a podcaster. I would prefer it if you have little to no experience behind the mic, just because I think it'd be fun and I think it'd be a good experience as long as you're comfortable doing it. If you're not comfortable, of course, don't worry about it. But if you are, if you think you want to give it a shot and you meet that criteria, then shoot me an email, david@whoonwho.com, and we will open up a little dialogue back and forth and just kind of see how things gel. All right? Great. So, in the meantime, let me move on to my next email. This one is from Graham Sheridan. Graham writes in and says, "Hi, David. Just been listening along to Who on Who, Episode 2, 4 to Doomsday." Let me apologize in advance if you haven't listened to that one, but the early episodes of Who on Who were a little on the rough side. As with most things in life, we tend to improve as we go along with experience, and the podcast is definitely that case. I've gotten responses from people who have started with the current episode and gone backwards, and I would imagine that would be even more telling, but I appreciate all of you who listen to the first couple, which I consider kind of clunky. I can't even really listen to them anymore. Not that I make a point to re-listen, but those of you who heard those first couple and considered, you probably considered jumping ship and stuck on board anyway, and hopefully things have improved enough to where it's palpable now. But anyway, he goes on to say, on your comment about play all on the DVDs, in which case, I for a little background for some of you who may not know, what I said was if I'm going to select that option, what I would like to have is them to cut out the opening and ending credits for each serial and just play the whole dang thing like a movie almost. He says that he can only heartily agree. BBC and 2 Entertain should remove the title sequences in between episodes. Once at the beginning and then once at the end would be brilliant, and they would negate the need to have to fast forward through all of it. He goes on to tell me, he says, I'm a podcaster myself and can only sit back in amazement at the lack of ers and ums and fluidity of your presenting style. Graham, that's very nice of you to say, but I would imagine that you're probably being very gracious there and not hearing the ums like I do when I go back and listen to it. So, but I do appreciate the compliment there. He says, keep up the good work, and you may be interested in the second of my podcasts, Professor How, which is a Doctor Who parody. The name comes from 2 places. It's a jumble up of Who into HOW, which I can appreciate, and you get How, and also Ace's constant reference to the 7th Doctor as Professor. So if you care to check it out, let me know what you think. I would be very grateful. You can get Graham's podcast that he's talking about on iTunes. I have listened to it, and it's good. It's definitely different, but that's the beauty of all the Doctor Who podcasts and really any other podcast that's out there. It really has everything to do with the host or hosts and exactly how they present it. I mean, let's be honest. The information is either fact-based or opinion-based. Opinions can vary widely, but the facts really can't. So a lot of it just depends on how we go about presenting this information to you, and if you like his style. But I enjoyed it very much, and we'll continue to listen to it. He says he hopes to produce the next episode soon. And he did also confirm for me that Peter Davison's first wife was Sandra Dickinson, and that they had written the theme for Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which someone else had written in and kind of hit me to that as well. But it's always nice to get that affirmation from someone else, so I appreciate that. While we're still on the subject of other podcasts, if you go to the website, www.whoonwho.com, I call it the website like there's only one out there in the internet land, but if you go to www.whoonwho.com and click on the links section, one of the links that you will find is for Geek Out Loud, the official podcast of geekoutonline.com. This podcast is not really Doctor Who related. There have been, I think, a couple episodes devoted to Doctor Who, but Geek Out Loud is a podcast for people who just enjoy, well, like the title says, geeking out to different things in the genre, whether it's books, comic books, soundtracks, movies, especially TV shows, just about everything. And the host is a gentleman by the name of Steve Glosson. He goes by Big Honkin' Steve online, and Steve is one of the people who, when I started out getting ready to do a podcast, I listened to Geek Out Loud and thought to myself, I like this guy's style, and I don't want to steal it. Again, like I said, everybody's got to have their own style, and the best advice that I was ever given by other podcasters is just be yourself, which is very true. And I continue to sort of pass that advice along to anybody that bothers to ask me my opinion about doing podcasting or any sort of public speaking. Is when you get up there, you need to be you, because that's what you bring to the table. It's different. But what Big Honkin' Steve brings to his show was a certain amount of levity. He likes to laugh. He likes to laugh at himself sometimes. He likes to sing a little bit. He just has a great time, and it really, really helps the show, considering that he is the sole host. And he's gone on to host several podcasts, many of which I listen to and enjoy very much, and now has his own radio show called The Big Honkin' Show. And so I got the opportunity to talk to Steve and I wanted to play that here for you so that you could listen to the interview. Steve is a great guy. If you are so inclined, please give his projects a listen. Steve's also a brand new Doctor Who fan, so we are slowly pulling him into the fold, as you'll discover here in this interview. So listen in. Here comes the interview with Big Honkin' Steve from the Big Honkin' Show. Here we go. All right, I'm online with Steve Glosson, affectionately known by his listeners as Big Honkin' Steve. And Steve has been gracious enough to come on here so I could talk to him a little bit about his podcasts, some of his projects, and a new radio show that he has called The Big Honkin' Show. Steve, welcome to Who on Who.
Well, thanks, Dave, for having me.
Thank you for being on here.
On Who. It's honking on Who. It's honking on Who on Who.
That's what this is. Hey, you know what? I'm going to have to call this the Big Honkin' episode of Who on Who.
There you go.
I'm going to have to do that. Now it's starting to sound like a Dr. Seuss book, so I should move on before we get too crazy here. But Steve is a podcaster and actually somebody who I rank right up there as a big influence for me when I was getting ready to make the leap into podcasting. Of course, there are a lot of Doctor Who podcasts out there, and many of them are British because the show itself is British. And as an American, I wanted to put the American slant on it, and but I also knew I wanted to do it solo for the most part. And one of your podcasts, which is Geek Out Loud, the official podcast of geekoutonline.com. See, I do listen to the show.
Nice.
Is a solo podcast for you, and I was always very impressed by how easy you sort of made it sound, being in there, and you do make light of it at times, but being in there and just you and the microphone and trying to fill, that time and keep the subject going and try not to lose listeners as you're going along, and it's like spinning plates on sticks, you just have to keep moving, and try to keep everything going, but you do that so well. You inject a lot of humor and a lot of yourself into the podcast, and so I'm just curious, what sort of background did you have pre-podcasting to speaking or anything like that?
Well, none, honestly.
Really? Okay. Well, you're just a natural.
Well, no, I say that jokingly. I was in 5th grade, and everyone in 5th grade in my little town joined 4-H. I don't know if it was kind of thought to be mandatory or if that was the cool thing to do, but there I was as a part of the 4-H club, and I'm kind of ashamed to admit that. But I got to be really big in 4-H, and in Georgia, and I guess in other states, the 4-H clubs have an event called District Project Achievement. And basically what you do is you enter into a certain category or area. A category is the best thing I can think of how to put this, and you do a speech and a presentation in front of judges in your little area. And when I was in 5th grade, I did a speech, did a presentation on sea turtles, and placed first in the little in the series of counties in the district we were in. And then the next year, I did one on computers and placed first again. And then I went into the area of the category of public speaking, which was more of a broad, you could just basically talk about whatever was on your mind. Usually people would talk about social issues or that sort of thing. And put myself up against some really strong other speaker type people, and just kind of began to mimic and see what they did. But I've never had a problem being in front of a crowd. I'm not a big fan of people staring and pointing, like if you're just standing there on display, but I've never had a problem with a microphone in my hand or having the attention of the people. And really, I feel like a lot of times at my heart, I'm an entertainer. I love to make people laugh. I love to, just make sure that people are engaged in whatever I'm saying or whatever I'm doing, and have been since I was a kid. You give me an audience, and I'm going to try my best to entertain them. And so it is that by the time I was a senior in high school, I had caught the attention of a few people in our local area who were doing broadcasts of high school football games and baseball games. And I was traveling with our broadcast team, and I was doing halftime stats and analysis and scores of surrounding games in our region and that sort of thing, and doing pregame shows and postgame shows. We had a Thursday night talking football show during football season, and I was a part of that every Thursday night as a 17, 18-year-old kid. And then when high school baseball season rolled around, I was actually calling some of the games by myself.
Oh, wow.
In the booth. And in fact, the main play-by-play guy had called me up, and one of our little league teams had gone to the state championship, and he said, "Listen, I've got this other prior obligation I've got to be a part of. Can you drive up to Tallapoosa, Georgia, which is right on the border of Georgia and Alabama, up in over in western central Georgia, northwest Georgia, really." And he said, "Could you come?" And they could possibly make it all the way to state. Would you be willing to come do the play-by-play for the state game? I'm like, okay, sure. And so I did that, and I got to call the game of these little guys winning the state playoff, the state championship, and absolutely treated it like it was the World Series. And we had a ball. It was so much fun, and I just absolutely loved the idea of sitting behind a microphone and talking to faceless people through the airwaves, whatever the case may be. I love listening to talk radio. I'm impressed by guys, regardless of their politics, who can sit and talk for 3 or 4 hours about whatever they've got to talk about.
Right.
And so it is that when I moved back to my hometown area, I'm a geek. Total geek, and I love comic books. Star Wars is, one of my favorite things in the whole wide world. I love movies, television, all that sort of stuff, and there was no outlet for me to discuss that with people. There was no one else around who collected comic books. There was one guy who would come to town every now and again, who we were friends, and he'd come to my house, and we'd end up sitting up till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning just talking about what had gone on in the months prior to me seeing him. And I'm like,
get it all out, right?
Yeah, I'm like, this has got to give. And this was right around the time that blogging and podcasting started to kind of blow up a little bit. I was a little bit late on the podcasting tree, I think. And I said, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this out. And so I started out, and it was what it was, and I didn't expect it to grow into much of anything. And lo and behold, I started getting emails, and people started listening, and it has been a blast. I absolutely love what I've been doing.
Well, great. Yeah, and I have to pay you the ultimate compliment. Normally, when I'm listening and getting caught up on podcasts in my car, occasionally my youngest son, who's 9, will be in the car with me, and he's usually right on that Nintendo DS. I mean, he just zones out completely. And I was listening to one of your podcasts, and you said something in a funny voice, or you sang something, most likely, or something, but he actually chuckled, and he asked me, about you and who you were and all that, and said, wow, he's really funny. And, that's a completely unsolicited compliment from a 9-year-old that normally pays no attention to anything that I'm doing.
Sure.
So congratulations on that, because I don't know that anybody else can.
I really appreciate that. I had an email from a mom who listened to the show with her 2 sons. One was 13, and the other was 8. Mm-hmm. And the 8-year-old called me Mr. Steve, the Star Wars guy. And
oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and just completely blew me away that the mom enjoyed listening, the 13-year-old enjoyed listening, and the 18-year-old enjoyed listening. Or I'm sorry, the 8-year-old enjoyed listening, because usually I can totally understand a 7 or 8-year-old getting into what I do. Mm-hmm. Maybe if the teenager's a geek, I can understand. But when mom's listening, I'm like, what? What are you doing listening, Mom?
That's a cool mom right there.
Well, to me, I've said this before on my show, that on Geek Out Loud, the official podcast of geekoutonline.com, I've said before that a lot of the geeky stuff we're into, whether it's Star Wars or Superman or comic books or whatever the case may be, Doctor Who, yeah, definitely Doctor Who. If we're into it, it's because for a lot of us grown-up guys, it appeals to something to the child in us.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm not saying that we necessarily hold on to the childish things, which I'm sure I do a little bit, I guess. I walk down the toy aisle and get excited when I see something new. But I feel like that nostalgia aspect of some of it comes into play, and we really kind of are getting in touch with that, and you have to have that little bit of imagination and that little bit of joy in what you're doing and what you're enjoying to really do it. And so I guess that comes across, and I love when kids listen. I love to hear from kids that when they've been listening, because it just lets me know that that I feel like I'm kind of doing my job, because when you get an email from a professor at a college and then you turn around, the next email's from an 8-year-old wanting to know what you got for Christmas, that's a pretty big deal, I think
he wants to compare toys with you and find out who got the better haul there. Yeah, it is very flattering. I'll get emails from people saying, "Hey, I went out and bought this DVD based on your recommendation," and I'm thinking, I shouldn't have that much say in anything that anybody does unless I claim them on my taxes, and that's just kind of how life works. But it's such a compliment, that people listen and they even care, what I think. But I got to tell you the dance party on Geek Out Loud. I know you're a big music buff. For the uninitiated on Steve's podcast, Geek Out Loud, he went ahead and did a show called the Big Honkin' Dance Party. And when I first downloaded it, I thought, okay, what is this now? But I have to admit, I started listening to it, and it was a blast. I mean, I'm driving down the road in my car, I'm tapping my hands on the steering wheel, I'm sort of bobbing my head along to the whole thing, and I'm thinking, this guy gets it. He really gets it. He doesn't take himself too seriously. He's just having some fun, and he's letting the rest of us sort of come along for the ride. How did that happen to come about?
The dance party was interesting because, and I'll pull back the curtain on my life, I had just gone through a pretty rough time emotionally, and it was just a few weeks out from Christmas when it happened, and I hated that it was that close to Christmas. And I was on Twitter one day, and I also at the time was big into blip.fm, and Blip is a service that you can search for a song and you can make a little playlist, and it's there. And I say make a playlist, it's almost like Twittering with music. And you can connect it to your Twitter account so that when you blip a song, it shows up on your Twitter. And so I found myself, as a joke, I tweeted, or I blipped, Gonna Make You Sweat by CNC Music Factory. Everybody dance now. And I found myself kind of, bouncing along, and there were people really digging it and laughing about it, and there was someone else who was kind of being a music snob, and I'm like, you know what, I'm not in the mood for music snobs right now.
Right.
And so I'm going to take every bad dance song and every fun song there's ever been, and I'm going to blip it because, you know what, I can do this. And so I started doing it, and before I know it, there were 2 or 3 other people who started blipping other fun dance songs, and just on Twitter I called it a Big Honkin' Dance Party. And so I said, you know what, I've got to do that. And it really did perk me up because I'm listening to these songs, and I was kind of dancing around, bouncing around, having a good time. And it really just put me in a good mood, and it really helped me out. So leading up to my Christmas episode, I was still kind of in a funk. And so to record the Christmas episode, I did, this is all this past year or last year, I tweeted a little dance party beforehand and got kind of pumped up, did the Christmas episode. I said, you know what, I'm bringing this to the podcast. So kind of for a New Year's thing, I did that. And I thought to myself as I was doing it, I'm like, this is either going to be the worst thing ever or one of the most fun things ever. And it was so well received that I have some more songs in my back pocket that I'm just anxious to get out there and do another dance party with, but I have not done a Geek Out Loud at this point in about 7 weeks. In fact, I've got to get one out soon, and so that I can move toward that dance party situation.
Well, yeah, definitely. Well, let's talk a little bit about from the podcast, and we'll go back to kind of fill in the podcast titles for those who want to find you online. But before we do that, you've segued now from podcaster to radio host.
Well, that's a loose. You can use that term loosely.
I use everything loosely, Steve. It's okay.
There you go.
But Steve is the host of the Big Honkin' Show, and you can find that on iTunes. But why don't you tell me a little bit about that? It's on the radio, isn't it?
Yes, it's on the local radio station here in the little town in which I live, and it's got about it's got almost a 90-mile range around. Some friends of mine who live in a town about 90 miles away were listening the other Saturday. The Big Honkin' Show is just a free-form conversation with me, basically. It's whatever's on my mind.
Okay.
And we'll talk about it. I will go through the Associated Press website and try to find just some crazy things to talk about that have gone on in life, and might bring those up. Stories from my life I'll tell, just to kind of introduce people to who I am, and if something's going on that week, I'll talk about it. If sports seems like something worth talking about, politics seems like something worth talking about, just whatever for an hour. See, it's just an hour-long show. Just whatever seems worth talking about, and having a good time with, we'll do it. It's all about fun, because my tagline has been bringing fun back to Saturday mornings. I grew up in a time when you got up in the mornings to watch Saturday morning cartoons. On Saturdays, it wasn't a big deal to get up early because cartoons were on. And you would spend literally the entire morning in front of the TV. And back in the day before cable, it was, you only had the three big networks and maybe a few local affiliate type stations. But the three big networks, their big push in the fall was the new Saturday morning lineup.
Oh yeah.
And man, I had schedules, man. At at 8:00 it's Gummy Bears, at 8:30 it's Smurfs, at 9:00 it's Muppet Babies. Right on. And you had to flip back and forth and decide what you're going to watch, and it was just so much fun, man, to sit there with a bowl of cereal and just watch Saturday morning cartoons. And you got up and got to go, and then there was the rest of the Saturday for you,
Yep.
And so I realized as I started growing up that Saturdays were really about sweating for adults. Saturdays are the day you do yard work. Saturdays are the day you clean house. And I'm like, you know what? By George, for at least an hour on Saturday mornings, I'm going to have fun again. And that's what that show has been about. Not too early, so I don't have to get up too early, but not too late in the day either. So it's kind of like, I tell people, it's kind of like a Saturday morning cartoon, except it's you can't watch it and it's not animated because I don't really move around that much.
Do you have a bowl of cereal with you though? I guess that's the big question.
No food or drinks in the studio, but it is a great show. We do record it. We do record it and release it as a podcast, and it's been fun. It's only 2 weeks old. This last episode we had some major technical difficulties at the outset, and we weren't able to get it recorded. But I've been able to bring in one of my good friends, Buck, who for years, this guy and I have talked about doing a radio show together, and we'd call it the Buck and Steve Show. And I said, yes, we'll call it the Buck and Steve Show, putting the BS back in talk radio. And so we had a great time. He's going to be back on the next episode and hopefully future episodes, and just to kind of add a voice, because it's a different thing, I found out, to try to talk for an hour when you've got to appeal to a general audience.
Right.
Geek Out Loud, I can talk about Star Wars, I can talk about G.I. Joe, I can talk about comic books, I can talk about Lost, I can talk about Doctor Who, I can talk about whatever the case may be, and my audience is going to listen based on the fact that they're into that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If in this area, if I start talking Star Wars, there are going to be a lot of radios click off. And so it's a challenge to be entertaining, and it's a challenge to be engaging with an audience, in as much as I can't fall back on Star Wars talk, and I can't fall back on Superman talk unless there's a joke in there somewhere, and so So to have someone else in studio with me was really helpful. I was so nervous the night before my first show, and I'm really treating this thing probably bigger than what it is, because it is just a local radio station right now, but we've got big plans for it, I think, down the road. Hopefully we'll see it grow and expand. I'm really excited about it.
Well, I think you should be, and I think that, just judging by your success with the podcasting and everything else, I don't think, you give it time like anything, and it's going to find its audience. I think that that's pretty much a safe bet. So, now, do you take callers on the show or anything like that?
Not yet. Not yet. Let me describe the radio station that I'm into. A lot of people I think we get a certain idea about radio stations and what they possess. We've seen Frasier, and we've seen
WKRP in Cincinnati.
WKRP in Cincinnati. We've seen these radio shows that take place and this is the complete opposite of that. This is, if you take the Beverly Hillbillies before they moved to Beverly Hills, and you put a desk and a microphone in one of the rooms of their house, you've got our local radio station. It's been there for years and years and years. And on the back wall in the little room in which I record, or which I broadcast from, on the wall behind me, there are shelves and shelves and shelves stuffed with records.
Wow.
Now, for your younger listeners, records are kind of like CDs, but bigger and not as shiny. They're black, and that's what we used to have back in the day. And this is a station that played all kinds of country music back in the day.
Wow.
And so I haven't perused through those records to find out what's on there, but I just imagine there's some Loretta Lynn and Hank Williams and that
Conway,
sort of thing.
Twitty, all kinds
and they're
of stuff.
not, and a lot of people would be like, wow, I bet those are worth something. And the thing is, no, they're not, because they're not like albums that were recorded. These are the singles that were sent out to radio stations by the music industry.
Right, yeah.
And basically what a DJ would do is he'd come in and he'd set up his playlist, and he'd just take a stack of records and start one here and have one ready to go here, and take breaks in between. They've upgraded. There's some computers and stuff around, and they're not a classic country station anymore. They're more of a classic hit station. And but it's just an amazing little place that feels like it's lost in time and trying to catch up with the 1990s at least. And so to take a call, you think of these places where they have someone sitting on the other side of the window with a phone bank where they're able to screen the call and say, "Big Honkin' Show, what would you like to talk about?" And they can tell you if you want to call. For me to take a call, there's a red button that I would push as I answer the phone, and there's no telling what I'm getting.
Right.
On the other, if I do that. So I'm not quite ready to go to taking calls yet, but we probably will in the future. Right now, what I'm trying to do is build up an email base, kind of like what has happened with Geek Out Loud.
Right.
A lot of the success of Geek Out Loud has been that people email, and at the top of the show, I start out by reading emails. And I found the ability, I guess, to kind of carry on a conversation with the email that I'm reading.
Right.
And so I'm trying to get that kind of thing going with the Big Honkin' Show, so that as people email, they're not just emailing, "Hey, enjoyed the show, really like it," that they're emailing, "Hey, this is what's been on my mind this week. What do you think?" And kind of set us up to talk about some other, some other things. In the past 2 weeks, I tell you what has really come to the forefront of the Big Honkin' Show, and because this last one didn't get recorded, you won't get to hear it, but we talked a lot about, we mentioned some more infomercials. And I've started to get some emails with some different products and that sort of thing. And by and large, a lot of infomercials just tick me off. They make me mad. Because, well, there's this thing for the toothbrush. There's a toothpaste thingy. And basically, it's a toothpaste dispenser that you mount to your bathroom wall, and you screw your tube of toothpaste in, and you stick your little toothbrush under it, and it will dispense toothpaste, because apparently no one can squeeze a toothpaste tube anymore. And it's like, I understand if you want to market this product to people who have, bad arthritis that really do sincerely have a problem with, the gripping and the squeezing and the getting everything out of the toothpaste tube that they'd like to get. But they're marketing this thing to 30-year-olds that are just starting out, families who can't apparently hit a toothbrush with the toothpaste. That's what ticks me off. It's like, surely people are not this stupid. I do have trouble getting my toothpaste on a toothbrush. This is something I struggle with in the mornings. I would like a little soap dispenser over there that puts out toothpaste. And I'm like, and the other thing that really just hacks me off are Snuggies.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
Because it's like the way they sell this thing is they open up the whole commercial with a woman on the couch under a blanket, and she's fumbling trying to get to the remote or fumbling trying to get to the phone. And it's like, it's not that hard. You reach out from under the blanket and you do what you got to do. You don't have to put on a robe that makes you look like you're in some kind of cult about to go sacrifice an animal somewhere. And now they've made Snuggies for dogs, and it really...
Have they really?
Yes, and that brings me to a point of passion in my life that I didn't realize was there, but I guess I just don't really suffer stupid people that much, and that's what they're really saying we all are. They're stupid people. Now, there are some products that have almost sucked me in. The ShamWow has almost got, because A, I really want to be able to dry things up like that.
Sure.
But B, I'm scared of the pitch man that's selling that thing. He just looks angry.
Yeah.
Hey, look at it. Watch it. It's soaking it up right now. Look at that. Look at it. Look at it. I'm like, I'm looking, sir. I'm looking. I'll buy one if you want me to.
Please don't yell at me.
Yes, exactly. So I've started getting some emails with some really interesting products that this Saturday we're definitely going to be talking about on the show. So, and hopefully all the tech difficulties are over and done with, and we'll have that out.
Well, that sounds like a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to listening to that one. But well, I'll tell you what. Let's do a quick rundown now. If anyone's interested in information on the Big Honkin' Show, they can go to your new website. Is bighonkinshow.com. Is that correct?
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Also, let's run down the podcast real quick. You are now the sole host of Starkville's House of L.
Yes.
Although you do have guests on there. It is SmallvillePodcast.com.
SmallvillePodcast.com. It is primarily a Smallville podcast, but we also call it a Superman podcast. You'll get a lot of DC Comics news that pertains to not necessarily the comics. Sometimes we'll talk about big events that are going on in Superman comics. But then, like with the new DC Entertainment that's been formed, and that sort of thing, we'll be talking about that on the next show and kind of giving some reactions to that. But if there's a big movie or animated feature that's coming out, we'll talk about that. But it is primarily a Smallville show. SmallvillePodcast.com.
And a very good one, too. I will highly compliment that. And Geek Out Loud, which is just always a fun time. And that's geekoutonline.com. And a fun community, too. You got a great bunch of people working your forum over there. And a lot of fun to go. Some budding comedians there. And a lot of people that just have a lot of fun with all the topics.
The snark flies, sir, over at the Geek Out forums.
It definitely does, and you've discussed Doctor Who on a couple of occasions, and Steve is a relative new Doctor Who fan, but he is all caught up with the rest of us on the new series, so that is a good thing, and
have absolutely loved it. By the way, I haven't watched any. Well, I say I haven't watched any. I watched the first part of the Green Death.
Oh,
is that what it was called? Tom Baker. Yeah. Was that Tom Baker? But I don't know why I watched the first part of that. But
hey, I don't know why you picked that one, but did somebody? Did you Netflix it, or did somebody?
It must have been on Netflix. It must have been on like the new Netflix thing on Xbox Live, because it'll say movies you'll love, and I'll be like, well, I'll check out some classic Doctor Who. But I absolutely am fascinated by this character, at least the way he's been presented in the new series.
Right.
He's a character who is fascinated with humanity and with life, and and is very serious about the preservation of life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just one of my favorite episodes of this series since it came back to television, to the telly, was in the first season with Christopher Eccleston.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember the title, but basically it was a two-parter, and it was the kids with gas masks for faces.
That's The Empty Child and The Doctor Dances.
Yes, okay. The Empty Child freaked me out.
Yeah.
It did its job.
Mm-hmm.
I was scared to death. But the Doctor Dances, when he figures everything out and he's able to kind of, as things are starting to work out, and he talks about, let this be, give me this day, give me this one day. He just gets so passionate.
Yeah.
And then as things begin to work out, he's just overjoyed that everyone lives.
Yeah.
And I just found myself completely, I'd kind of bought into the character up to that point. I love the way that he was so funny at one moment, and could turn and be so somber and serious and menacing almost in some instances in another. But when his joy over the fact that everyone at this moment got to live just burst forth, I absolutely fell in love with this character.
Mm-hmm.
And the way he is portrayed in this new series. And I had a hard time warming up to
David Tennant?
Yeah, I had a hard time warming up to David Tennant a little bit at first, but even he has had just some he's become so cool to me, because he has pulled off so well the same thing that Eccleston did, almost as he got on into the first season there, a little bit more so, where he was very intense in some places. I remember right after his regeneration into the Tennant Doctor, in that Christmas special with that invasion. Was it Christmas Invasion?
That's my favorite Christmas special out of all of them.
The ones I've seen, mine too. I think, well, I guess I've seen them all at this point of the new series, but I would agree with you. That's probably my favorite. When he's got the goofiness when he starts to quote the Lion King. He's like, wait, that's the Lion King, and he's got the the coolness when he's sword fighting and his hand gets cut off. He's like, look at their new hand. And then as he lets the guy live, the bad guy live, and he turns his back to him, and the man begins to attack him, and spoiler alert, he slings a sword at a trap or a button that opens a trap door under the bad guy. He says, I'm the guy that doesn't give you, I know who I am now. I'm the man that doesn't give second chances.
Yeah, no second
and I'm just
chances.
like,
yeah.
excuse the street coming out in me, but I'm like, oh, snap. I was like, this man is all, and so I have really, truly enjoyed this series, and I'm anxious to see the few remaining specials with David Tennant, and I'm anxious to see this new Doctor come about.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because the new Doctor, Matt Smith, is so much younger. He's only 26 years old. So, but the Doctor, that mechanism of the Doctor being able to regenerate, it just gives the show perpetual life. It's genius in the way that it's designed, and it's one of the things about it that just makes it so great. And Eccleston's Doctor, of course, when we meet him, he's kind of broken, and it really takes kind of his time with Rose to kind of repair him to the point where he gets to where he is. But both of those scenes you're talking about are fantastic scenes. And as a matter of fact, that two-parter with Eccleston was written by the new showrunner, by Stephen Moffat. So he's the one that's heading up the show now. So exciting things coming down the pike. But in the meantime, I appreciate you being on. And
well, thank you.
And talking briefly a little Doctor Who, and of course off air we got a chance to talk a lot of Superman stuff, which was a lot of fun. But I would encourage anybody out there that is looking for a non-Doctor Who podcast that has a little sprinkling here and there, a little stuff, but also has just other fantastic subjects that we all geek out about. Star Wars, we all have different things that we are passionate about in this genre. and that's all covered over there at Geek Out Loud. And you will, what else can I say? You will have a lot of fun while you're doing it, while you're listening to this podcast. So I highly recommend that. And just give this guy a listen, this Mr. Steve Glosson here, because he's a good podcaster, and I think he's going to go very far. One of these days he's going to be hosting the Emmys, and I'm going to say, hey, I think I talked to that guy one time. So
well, let's not push it, sir. I told someone the other day, I'm like, my problem is I got started real late on the tree. I'm 32 now, and so I've got to really rush the success. If it's going to come, it's got to be rushed.
32. You're a baby. You got plenty of time.
There you go.
All right. Well, thanks again, Steve. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate it.
And we'll talk to you again. All right. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed that interview with Steve Glosson, also known as Big Honkin' Steve. And I would encourage any of you that just want to listen to a non-Doctor Who podcast that is still genre-specific to science fiction, fantasy, a lot of the things that Doctor Who fans tend to enjoy. You really do need to give a listen to Geek Out Loud, the official podcast of geekoutonline.com. And again, I want to thank Steve Glosson for taking his time to sit down and talk to me about his projects and about his new fascination with Doctor Who, and I hope to hear from Steve again very soon. But again, his show on the radio is called The Big Honkin' Show. You can find that on iTunes. You can also find Geek Out Loud or Starkville's House of L, which you may also find just listed as SHOE, S-H-O-E. Just look under Smallville Podcast. I think that one will probably come up as the number one Smallville podcast out there if you are like me and you happen to be a fan of that show. All right. Well, I think it is time to move on to the DVD review. So let's go ahead and get the TARDIS controls set for March 8th, 1984. And we are heading off to Androzani Minor to check out the caves and the adventures there with the Fifth Doctor, Peter Davison. Hang on, here we go. And we are here, Caves of Androzani by Robert Holmes, directed by Graham Harper. This is a 4-part story starring the Fifth Doctor and Perry Brown as his companion. This is the Doctor's 136th adventure, for those of you keeping track. And again, like I said, it's a 4-part story, which of course makes me happy, as all of you know. Before I go any further, I would like to send a big thank you to Peter Cavanagh, who wrote me and suggested this story as a possible one to review, as one of Peter's favorites. And normally I don't step outside of Doctor Who or discussions of Doctor Who, getting into subjects that are quote-unquote possibly taboo. But I would just like to make a quick mention that Peter is a Brit, and he is currently out of country right now serving as a missionary. So if you are of the persuasion to pray, I'm just going to ask quickly to my listeners that tonight, before bed, when you're tucking the kids in, or if you are inclined to hit your knees in the evening, as am I, to thank the Lord for what you have, please say a quick prayer for Peter and his associates that are essentially doing God's work, and they are out there risking life and doing what they do, what they feel led to do. And Peter takes the time to email me and thank me for doing this podcast, something that he listens to while he's in country doing what he's doing. And I am so humbled by people like you, Peter, that I hope when you hear this that it in some small way makes your day, lets you know that I did hear you and I did appreciate the suggestion. So with no further ado, let's get on with the story. The TARDIS, as many of you know, lands on Androzani Minor, basically a dust bowl of a little tiny planet. The Doctor and Perry exit the TARDIS, and the Doctor is immediately interested in some indentations on the ground that indicate that a ship of some kind had landed there recently, although the place really is just barren. I mean, all you see is just sand and rock everywhere. There isn't a hint of water. And he decides to follow the trail of a craft, a small, like, one-man transportation craft, toward these caves, because he's curious and decides to go doing some exploring before they leave. So Perry and the Doctor go cave exploring. Now, one of the neat little high point pieces of trivia here for you Fifth Doctor fans is that during this point in the story, while he and Perry are exploring the caves, he finally explains the celery on his coat. Now, I can't do the explanation justice. Many of you probably already know it. Some of you may even know it by heart. But if you haven't seen it and you're curious, it could be one incentive to pick up this story, because he finally explains the celery that he wears on the lapel of his coat. But quickly, as is most often the case in Doctor Who stories, he and Perry are mistaken for, in this case, gun runners, and they are charged with being executed by a General Chellick, who is currently having a little battle with a rebel by the name of Sheraz Jek. And there is... let me just sort of paint a broad picture, like I tend to do with these stories, because I don't want to go into a total blow-by-blow. If you are interested in the story after my explanation, then obviously I encourage you to rent it or buy it and watch it. But I don't really want to just go into the whole thing, because otherwise, what's the point in you watching the DVD, right? So anyway, essentially, the Doctor and Perry get embroiled into a something that is not only political, but it's also a sort of a business. There's a lot of intrigue and a lot of not so much espionage. I was going to say espionage, but there's a lot of intrigue and a lot of twists and turns in the story between some of the key players as to their motivations, what's going on down on the planet, who has what, and the value of it. But in a nutshell, the main thing for Doctor Who fans to walk away from here is that the Doctor and Perry inadvertently become the victims of something called Spectrox poisoning, and shortly find out that they are going to die from this, and that there really is only one cure, and that is the milk from a bat that has gone dormant into the very, very low levels of the cave, where there's not a lot of oxygen, and really not, it's just not something that's going to be easily gotten to. Also along the way, the Doctor and Perry are kidnapped by Sheraz Jek, who he has taken sort of a instant fascination with Perry, and who can blame the guy? She's a very attractive woman, and he holds them hostage and saves them from an execution in a very clever way, and they begin to start to try to figure out what's going on around them, and also how to save themselves from this sickness that they have, which brought up one of the first plot holes for me in this story. The Doctor tries very hard to... He seems only half interested in his own personal fate. The fact that he's going to die from this. I think he's more concerned with what's going on with everyone else. What are Sheraz Jek's motives? What are General Chelik's motives, the other players in the game, what's really going on here between the two planets, Androzani Major and Androzani Minor, and just a sort of a B story. He's worried about himself. Now I will qualify that by saying that he is very, very worried about Perry, because he knows that Perry's already exhibiting a lot of the symptoms of the Spectrox poisoning, and he is very concerned that he's running out of time to help her. But this is the first plot hole for me. Perry spends most of her time in this story upset about the fact that she's dying. She is, as I think she reacts. I think there's a certain amount of validity to the way she reacts, because anyone would, given essentially a death sentence here and being told, you've only got a limited amount of time to live. We all go through or at least we've all heard of the stages people go through at that point in their lives, if, should that happen. But it's clear, or at least it's clear to me, the viewer, that Jack has taken Perry and the Doctor captive because he's got the horn for Perry. I mean, that's maybe an American colloquialism, but he's attracted to her. Okay. Now I know it's maybe not in her personality to take advantage of someone. Perhaps she's a bit put off by him. She's almost reviled by him. But come on, this is a guy who's got resources. He's got a certain amount of ability within his position. He knows the caves well. Why not just open up to the guy and go, look, I know you want to keep me down here for the rest of my days because you fancy me, but there's a slight flaw with your plan. I got Spectrox poisoning. And then maybe instead of him being a sort of a hurdle, for them to get over, or a barrier to get around, he could become more of a helper, which at the end of the story he does turn out to help the Doctor to save Perry. So I think they could have the story could have gone a completely different way if they'd have looked at that as a possibility. But overall, I was struck by two things regarding this story. The first one is the amount of intrigue. The story has a lot of depth. It works on a lot of different layers. A lot of the characters are following their own agenda, and there are a lot of surprises. And so overall, I would say it's a very sophisticated story, even by today's standards. And today's standards are, I would think, much more sophisticated. Actually, I believe today's stories are much more sophisticated than the classic Doctor Who stories that we all love from yesteryear. And I think many of you would agree with me on that. But this one stands out. It definitely has a lot going for it on those many different levels. So you've got that. The second thing that stood out to me is the sheer amount of violence that was in this story. And it wasn't off-putting to me. It just was there. I noticed it, and I thought, wow, okay, there are people getting shot. There's machine guns being fired. For a moment there were some guards chasing the Doctor, and they were using these what looked like little submachine guns, and for a moment I thought maybe I was watching an episode of A-Team from the 80s instead of Doctor Who, but it just seemed much more action-oriented and more violent as far as the way death was treated. It wasn't as horrific as I've seen in past Doctor Who stories. It didn't seem to slow down or stop the flow of the story when somebody died. We just sort of moved on from that, and that just sort of struck me as odd a little bit, especially for a program that is, for the most part, a family program. I would think twice before I let my youngest son watch this. Granted, there's no blood, there's no violence, there's no anything like that, but still. In comparison to some of the other more lighthearted Doctor Who stories, and even some of the darker tone stories, like say Pyramids of Mars, that had a real nice gothic feel to it, there just wasn't any bash over the head machine gun violence like there was in this one. And from what I've heard from other Doctor Who fans, from what I've read and researched, this particular story doesn't even come close to what we're going to see coming up with Colin Baker's early stories, which is what caused a lot of the big kerfuffle that got the show, bumped for a short time and then brought back. And, we all know the sordid history behind that. And, again, let me qualify my statements just by saying this, okay? Anything that you watch as an adult or anything you let your kids watch as a parent, okay, is your decision. I'm not here to tell you what to watch or what not to watch. I'm here basically to tell you my particular opinion about a story, about the contents of the DVD, etc., etc. There is an on-off button on your TV. There is a channel selector on your TV. There are other DVDs to watch. Personally, I like this story, and I like this DVD a lot. So I don't want to paint myself into a corner where you think that I am being too critical of it. It was just something that sort of stood out for me. The performances were great by Nicola Bryant, by, of course, Peter Davison, who always, I think, brings his A game to just about every story. The supporting cast, fantastic. And all in all, before we go into extras, I would like to say that I would give this story 5 cloister bells out of 5. As I mentioned earlier, the Caves of Androzani is very frequently marked up there by Doctor Who fans as one of the best classic series episodes. And as someone who literally, the first time that I saw this story, it was because, as I've mentioned in the past many times, that I'm infatuated with the whole regeneration concept. So I watched every story where the Doctor regenerated and every first story of the Doctor, afterward that I could get my hands on. But at that particular time, the person that had all the Doctor Who stories that would show them to me, we tended to watch them very, very late at night. I'm not a late night person. So what would happen is we would start the story and I'd make it through the first part and partway through the second part and then nod off. And then I would sleep through the whole thing and maybe wake up and catch the tail end. So I really didn't have a lot of memories about the Caves of Androzani. And when I picked up the DVD, I picked it up mainly for nostalgia because it was Peter Davison's last story, and really hadn't sat down and watched it until I decided to review it for this particular episode of Who on Who. And wow, this one is now one of my favorite classic Doctor Who stories. This is perhaps not the best choice for a new Doctor Who fan to show, but if you don't have this and you're a classic Doctor Who fan, if you're a Peter Davison fan, this is probably one of the best put together stories of his entire run. And sadly, it's his last story, but it still doesn't discount the quality of this particular story, and it is well worth having. So again, 5 out of 5. I heartily recommend that you go out and watch this, rent it, get it through Netflix if it's available there, and if you are so inclined, pick it up, add it to your collection, because you will not regret it. Not to mention the fact that aside from being a Class A #1 story, there are some fantastic extras on the DVD, which we're going to talk about right now.
Extra, extra, read all about it. Extra, extra, read all about it.
Yes, when you get to the special features section of a DVD and you notice that they've got that little right arrow telling you that there's a second page, you click over to the second page and there's another arrow pointing to a third page, you know that there are some special features here. So that is the case on this particular DVD. 3 pages, well, more accurately, maybe 2¼ pages of special features on this single disc DVD of The Caves of Androzani. So let's do a quick rundown of the extras. There is a behind the scenes special called Behind the Scenes The Regeneration. I was really excited when I saw this on the menu because, again, I'm a big fan of the whole concept of regeneration. So I was looking forward to, maybe a quick interview with Peter Davison, Colin Baker, the whole thing back and forth. And really all it is just a recording of the actual filming of the regeneration scene in the TARDIS with Peter Davison, Nicola Bryant, Colin Baker. It's interesting, sort of in a pull back the curtain kind of way, but it didn't really add anything to it as far as I'm concerned. But still, fun. Fun all the less. The next one was actually even more fun to me. This is it's simply dubbed the original opening scene, but there is a text card that comes after it which tells you a little bit about what they did. The restoration team actually went in and adjusted the opening scene because the matte painting for the planet was done, of course, on video, and the actual filming was done on film. So in the original airing, you could see sort of some wavy sort of effect going on, almost like there was a curtain behind them that was blowing to an extent, and you don't see that when you play the DVD because it's been cleaned up. But if you go in and look at this, then you can appreciate, if nothing else, you can really appreciate the love and the kind attention and fantastic work that the restoration team puts in on these Doctor Who DVDs, which they deserve so much. There's so many kudos from us Doctor Who fans for all the work that they do. But that is definitely something that I thought was very interesting. There's also an extended scene that takes place on the planet between some mercenaries that are there, and it was a great scene. They could have left it in. I think maybe it was possibly 2 minutes longer than the cut scene that's in the actual show. Not a whole lot there. Great little feature on creating Sherez Jek, who is really a very dramatic, sort of sad character in this. I don't know that I would paint him as the villain. I don't know that I would paint him as a hero, but he's a very strong character in this story, and it just, in a way, kind of reminds me of like the Hunchback of Notre Dame or something like that. He's just sort of a sad character that you almost want to root for, but really greatly realized with fantastic makeup, costuming, and of course, the performance was just phenomenal. So it's a great little background in how they did his makeup and how he, approached the role, some of the scenes that they shot, things like that. So a neat little option there. BBC One trailer, which is standard on a lot of these Doctor Who discs, is another special feature. And of course, then we get to the audio options. Again, we have the isolated music track, which I've had listeners write in and say, oh yeah, I turn that on when I'm reading, or I turn that on with the info text, and that way I can watch the show without the dialogue interfering with the info text, and or turn it on with the subtitles, that sort of thing. So it's there. I'm not a big fan of that, but hey, if you've got if there's something in some way that fulfills a need for you or a want for you, then hey, I'm behind that 100%. But the commentary, my goodness, the commentary. Now that I am the first one that will say, the commentary just doesn't do it for me, or the commentary does. And I've said many, many times what I think constitutes a great commentary. And folks, this one is another commentary that is just delivers for me on every level. You got Peter Davison, you got Nicola Bryant, and you have Graham Harper, the director. Peter Davison continues to amaze me to no end that when he sits down to record these commentaries, how much detail he remembers from filming these episodes. I mean, gosh, this is 25 years ago, and he's talking about, oh yeah, it was cold that day, and I had to wear this, or when I shot this scene, my shoe was untied, blah blah blah. The guy is just so fascinating to listen to, and it's not just generic stuff. It's very episode specific, and it is a treat to listen to because you kind of get a chance to kind of get into Peter Davison's head a little, about where he was when he was filming it, mentally, emotionally, all that. There's a lot of great banter between him and Nicola Bryant, Graham Harper, a lot of laughs. They love the show. You can tell by the way they talk. They love the experience. They love the show, and everything about the entire project. But they don't. It's not Shakespeare. I guess if I'm making myself real clear here, to them it was a job. It was a fantastic job. It was a wonderful experience and something that they still embrace. But yet something they can take a half a step back from, laugh about something that maybe didn't go as planned, or a special effect that may be a little more hokey than they really would have liked back in those days, and that sort of thing. But all in all, really, really wonderful commentary. So even if you're not a huge commentary fan, if you're a fan of Peter Davison and Nicola Bryant, you need to listen to the commentary on this. Go through it once without, and then go through it again later with the commentary on, and you will not regret this, honestly. The next three items are the last three special features, and I enjoyed them. It was BBC One, the BBC 1 o'clock news, BBC 9 o'clock news, which both just had basically news reports about Peter Davison stepping down as the Doctor, but no announcement yet who the sixth Doctor would be. And then there was a little, looks like maybe a morning talk show called Southeast at 6, which aired originally on July 29th, 1983. It was an interview with Peter Davison and John Nathan Turner discussing his decision to step down from being the Doctor at that time, and whether or not there was any credence to the rumor of there being possibly a woman stepping into the role of the Doctor. And it just occurred to me that having just gone through everything with the who will be the 11th Doctor debate, and whether or not the Doctor would be a woman or an actor of a different ethnic background or anything like that, that everything old is new. Apparently this happens every time an actor steps down from the role of the Doctor. So I thought that was very enlightening, and very, very refreshing to see. It was a nice, candid interview with both Davison and John Nathan Turner, and well worth a quick look. Not very long, but definitely something that was worth looking at. So that brings us to the end of this particular DVD review. No Easter eggs on this disc, which really surprised me because there were so many great extras here, and I thought for sure that there would be an Easter egg or two on this particular disc. But the next episode will the next episode will definitely be the review of City of Death. I apologize for continuing to put that one off. There's just been a lot going on, and I really, really want to do that one with Michael from the Tin Dog Podcast. He and I have just had a little struggle trying to get our schedule straight, and in the meantime, I didn't want to go too long between podcasts, and Peter had suggested this episode, which was sitting there sort of shouting at me from the shelf, and I thought, why not? Let's pop this one in and give it a tumble. So, thank you for listening, as always. Real fast, I'm going to throw one idea out to everybody that is sort of still in the formulating phase here. If you are a listener to Who on Who, and if you are planning on coming to Gallifrey 21 in February of 2010, I am attempting to plan a get-together of the listeners of Who on Who. I wanted to do something a little different, a little unusual, so because, well, that's just who I am. So what I'm shooting for is going to be the first of hopefully many, the first annual Who on Who listener hot tub party at the hotel there, at the LAX Marriott Hotel, and I have confirmed with someone who's been there before that there is indeed a hot tub. It's outside. It's Los Angeles. I know it's February, but the weather should be decent enough where I think we can pull it off. I've spoken to Dave Hingley, who has is always there for me support-wise with the artistic and tech support, and have asked Dave his thoughts on possibly doing a special Who on Who hot tub party logo. Now, here's the way that this will hopefully work. If you're planning on being there, what we're going to do is once we get everybody into the hot tub, we're going to try to have a microphone where we can record a quick episode, and this is going to take place toward the tail end of the convention, where we can basically just kind of sit around, prune up, and talk about our favorite parts of Gallifrey 21, what we liked, what we didn't like, that sort of thing. And we all know there's not going to be anything we didn't like. I mean, come on, that won't take very long, right? But just overall have a nice time, a nice little thing that we can record for posterity, put out there as an episode of Who on Who. And we want to get a photograph. If you are interested and are willing to make a small donation, say $5 a piece per person, to go toward Dave, because I want to, of course, give Dave some sort of compensation for his talent. Dave is willing to take a photograph of all of us and create a drawing similar in style to the Who on Who logo. You've seen it on the website, and it will be all of us together in the hot tub. And what I'm going to do at that point is create a T-shirt at the Who on Who store that you can go and buy. And that way you'll be able to show it to folks and say, hey, see that guy right there holding David Huey's head under the water? That's me, or whatever the case may be. And we may even try to get some names on the back of the shirt, that sort of thing. And I think it'll be a lot of fun. It'll be something that we can talk about and laugh about and just have a good time. So I'm tossing that idea out there. If anybody sees any flaws with that or any holes in that logic, please let me know. Shoot me an email at david@whoonwho.com and say, hey, that's not going to work because of so-and-so, or hey, I think that's fantastic and I'll be there. We are really excited about going to Gallifrey. We're excited about meeting people face to face for the first time. I'm excited because I've never been to a Doctor Who convention, so I'm really looking forward to meeting some people who know their way around Gallifrey and are willing to drag me by the hand if at all necessary. So there is that. You can follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/David Huey, and you can also find me on Facebook. The last name is spelled H-O-O-I-E. If you send me a friend request on Facebook, please put a little note on there that you listen to the podcast. That way I know who you are. I want to send a quick shout out to Jonathan Huddle and Christopher Burgess, who are both new friends of mine on Facebook and both listeners to the podcast. Thank you guys for friend requesting me on Facebook. I appreciate that. And I believe that is all. Next time is City of Death, and I will see you then. Until then, thank you very much again for listening. Take care of yourselves, and I'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.